All right, well, welcome everybody to tonight's event. Tonight is another event in the Nakba commemoration that's been happening this week, the commemoration of the events of 1947 to 48, when over 750,000 to 800,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homeland, and over 450 villages were destroyed and erased from the map. And in the wake of it was the creation of the modern state of Israel in 1948 and then in 49. And we're commemorating those events this week. This event is being put on by the Rachel Corrie Foundation. And I should mention that Craig and Cindy wish they could be here tonight, as always. However, they're in Israel now. On May 21st, their court case, which many of you may have been following, will be heard at the Israeli Supreme Court. It's scheduled for May 21st. We assume it will happen then, and I guess we'll have to follow the news and see what happens in the, as most of you know, in the wrongful death lawsuit case about their daughter, Rachel Corrie. So tonight's event is put on by RCF, and we want to thank everybody who helped make this possible tonight. A lot of people back in the tables here. Please at some point go by there, take a look. Maybe there's some things to buy, including, of course, a new book by Ali Abunimah called The Battle for Justice in Palestine, which we'll be talking about here tonight. My name is Steve Naiva. I teach at the Evergreen State College, but really I'm here tonight in my other hat, which is a longtime activist on behalf of justice and freedom and self-determination for the Palestinian people. Been active in this movement since the mid-'80s, if you can believe that, since I was a college student at the University of Virginia, at a time when being active for justice for Palestinians was, to be honest with you, simply unheard of. I had lived in Palestine in the early 70s. My dad was a doctor in the West Bank. I'd been exposed to Israel's occupation and colonization of Palestinian land. And when I became politically active in the 1980s, that was the issue I was working on, with about maybe 6 or 7 other people on my campus, a Palestinian friend of mine and his brother, an Egyptian friend of mine and his brother, and 2 Pakistani guys. And we were the Palestine Solidarity Group on the campus in the 1980s. And at that time, it was a time of what I would call Zionist hegemony, or pro-Israel sort of domination of the debate over Palestine. On college campuses, you could not really address this issue. If you were a faculty member or prospective faculty member who spoke up on behalf of rights for Palestinians, you were not going to get a job on the college campus. One of my college professors, I brought the issue up, and he told me, the Palestinians don't exist. They're simply a fabrication designed to harass the Jews. That's a literal quote from a well-known professor of international law. And it got to the point where the pro-Israel activists on the campus, because like most campuses in the United States, they had the run of the place, they'd be surprised when we showed up, and they'd even be amused that we would bring up the issue of Palestine. I mention this because our speaker tonight, Ali Abunimah, and the new book, The Battle for Justice in Palestine, is going to be talking about a very different environment, an environment in which it has now become legitimate to talk about Palestine, to talk about rights, to talk about Israel's colonization and occupation of Palestinian people and land. And in fact, in many college campuses, not only here in Olympia and Evergreen, but at the University of Washington, for example, right now, where there's an active campaign around boycott and divestment, and other college campuses, the tide has turned. We're in a new strategic environment, not only at college campuses, but also in communities, countrywide, co-ops, other areas where people are raising the question of ending Israel's occupation, its colonization of Palestinian land, and the struggle for justice for Palestinians. And we're in a new strategic environment, and that's where Ali comes in, and his new book is going to talk about this. I first came across Ali in actually late 80s, early 90s, when a college roommate of mine was working in the library at Princeton University. And he called me up and he said, Steve, I finally met somebody who has the same views as you do about Palestine. And actually you guys have the same kinds of views. It's amazing. I finally met somebody. And I was like, oh, who's that? He says, oh, this is a Palestinian guy. Greg Williams.
I remember him. He used to work at the circulation desk, and I often wondered what happened to him. So afterwards, you have to put us back in touch.
I will.
Is he okay?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Say hello to him.
I will. Greg actually published a novel. He's written several novels.
Okay.
He lives in New York City. And I heard about Ali, and I filed it away that this was someone I should meet at some point. And then later on, in the late 90s, I think I heard his name again in Palestine activism circles. And then, of course, when I really got to know who he was in the early 2000s, when he and several other people, a few friends of mine as well, founded the indispensable website, the Electronic Intifada, which if you don't use and access and enjoy and learn from, you should be doing so at this time. So Ali is a co-founder of the Electronic Intifada, and I think equally as important is that he's become a major presence in American media circles. Not someone who's shy about appearing on CNN or NBC.
A major absence in American media circles.
Well, let's just say for Palestinian activists, you're one of the few that really gets out there. And we'll take on the folks. And so I think for a lot of us, we were very excited that we have such an articulate and eloquent person. He is also, who gets every now and then into media circles. Maybe no longer, huh? And maybe because of the next thing I'm going to mention, is that he's written a number of books. The previous to this one was called One Country, A Bold Proposal to End the Israeli-Palestinian Impasse. And it's about, he makes the argument around how we're in a period now where we can, if we're struggling for justice for Palestine, we can no longer think in terms of a two-state solution. We need to be thinking in terms of some kind of one-state situation for a number of reasons, but certainly one has been the relentless colonization of Palestinian land and relentless settlement of the remaining Palestinian lands of the West Bank, which has created a de facto one-state situation right now. And the other is that as a element of justice, a two-state solution can't address the other injustices that have been generated through this conflict and this situation. And one of those includes what we're commemorating here tonight, which is what Palestinians call the Nakba. In English, we usually translate it as the catastrophe, the expulsion of Palestinians from the homeland and the creation of the State of Israel, which is something that cannot truly be addressed as a matter of justice within a two-state solution. So, tonight he'll be speaking more about the battle for justice in Palestine, and I'll just say a couple words about that, and that is that what so excites me about this new work is that it's not a book of history, it's not retelling the tale, it's not countering myths about Palestinians or falsehoods being made on behalf of Israel. It's not a book written from a position of weakness. In fact, it's a book of strategy and of strategic analysis, and it's trying to plot out where we are right now. What is the strategic landscape? Where are we in terms of the struggle for justice for Palestine at this time, and what are we up against? And there's a number of things he talks about, and I hope he will talk about. But let me just mention one thing that he does talk about in the book, which he talks about us here in Olympia. He has a section in the book where he's talking about how Israel is now...
Don't spoil it.
Okay. All right. Let's just say, well, because I'm not going to spoil the story, but let me just say this much. I wanted to be able to say this tonight to this group here, is that it has to do with the co-op's boycott campaign against Israeli products, which was a precedent setting, I think, in this country, and kudos to all of those here in this community who worked on that, but also about the Israeli campaign to suppress that boycott, particularly Ali's great work at uncovering the role of Stand With Us Israel, this sort of, far right-wing pro-Israel outfit in Seattle, their branch in Seattle, and the Israeli Consulate General, and then organizing with some local pro-Israel figures to sue the boycott. And I wanted to mention this because if you haven't heard recently, in the last couple weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks ago, the appeal to the lawsuit put on by this assorted group of pro-Israel forces was unceremoniously thrown out by the Washington State Supreme Court as a malicious lawsuit designed simply to suppress the speech and protected speech and activism of those of us on this issue. And I think it's really important for us to recognize the severity of the pushback, even by our legal system, against that lawsuit. Very important. So, without much more to say, I want to emphasize to everyone, or I don't know the right verb here, but encourage, exhort. If you want to think about the strategic landscape today, how we should be thinking about this, how we struggle, there are a lot of great ideas in this book. I hope you buy it. I think Ali will sign copies of it afterwards. And so tonight, we're looking forward to this conversation together about these issues with Ali Abunimah.
No, thank you for a very, very generous and comprehensive introduction. And thank you, Stephen. Thank you, too, for finally making the connection to Greg Williams. I had often wondered, I have to put this on airplane mode because otherwise people are going to call us. I can put them on the speaker and see who they are, but just as I started to speak, someone called. Okay, no one will call now. So I had often wondered why this man was so interested in me and what I had to say about Palestine, and now I finally understand. In any case, I'm very grateful to the Rachel Corrie Foundation, to everyone involved. Olympia is a special place. It's a special place for many reasons, but one of them is because it is the home of the Rachel Corrie Foundation, the home of the Corries, and the home of Rachel. And I'm so grateful for the work that the foundation does to keep Rachel's memory and legacy and work alive, but also to continue to shine light on the struggle that Palestinians are waging for justice. As I was driving up in the car from Portland today, I listened to the interview that Cindy and Craig did with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman at the Electronic Intifada. It's on this week's Electronic Intifada podcast, as they're talking about the journey that they have just embarked on in the ongoing quest for some measure of justice. I'm not sure what justice can come from the thoroughly corrupt Israeli system, but the pursuit of justice is important, and pursuing it in every venue. And Cindy and Craig again talked about this not just being a struggle for justice for Rachel, but using Rachel's life and legacy to continue to shine light on attacks on human rights defenders, whether they're international, whether they're Palestinian. And that's such important work. So we wish them Godspeed, and we wish them success in this ongoing struggle. As we mark Nakba Day, it's also a year, almost exactly a year, that I was in the Gaza Strip. I managed to get to Gaza finally after several years of trying, and I went with the Palestine Festival of Literature, and when we were on our way to Cairo about this time last year, the Rafah border crossing had been closed for 5 days based on some pretext the Egyptians had given. There had been, I think, an attack on the army by militants in Sinai, which had been blamed as usual on Palestinians, even though there was absolutely no evidence for that. The border was shut down, and we didn't even know if we were going to be able to go to Gaza. Luckily, it opened the very day we were on our way to Rafah, and we got in and spent an absolutely incredible week that not a day has gone by without me remembering some aspect of that visit to Gaza and the people I met there. And I wrote a little bit, not a great deal. I couldn't do justice to that experience, but I wrote about some of those experiences in the battle for justice in Palestine. And one of the things that I remember very vividly was visiting Rafah and seeing for myself the place where Rachel had lived and died, and visiting the Rachel Corrie Center in Rafah, which was just an amazing experience. The young people who work there, who volunteer there, were just incredible. Their motivation, their determination to give the children in Rafah an education, a life, some fun, was just incredible. And people were not shy about talking about the difficulties that life in Rafah entails, including the fact that so many young people feel so hopeless that they just want to try and get out of Gaza. Many people have turned to this painkiller tramadol that comes in, and people talked about the impact that has had. Many people just tune out with this drug. But what was so incredible was to see how many people have not given into this and who are absolutely determined. And the work done at the Rachel Corrie Center was really impressive. Was really something to support and nurture. And it was just wonderful that Rachel is honored there. She is remembered, and she has a very special place in the hearts of people in Rafah. And what was also shocking and amazing, even though we had been all over Gaza in this short week, and Gaza is alive. It's a lively place. Yes, people are literally caged into Gaza, but at the same time, there's tremendous life and energy. And that's true in Rafah. But what was also striking was that for large tracts of Rafah, the city, you don't see a single building without bullet holes or shell holes in it. And it was just an incredible reminder of what people were living through at the time when Rachel was there. And in fact, the areas where there were thousands of houses that were destroyed in this period, 2003, 2004, most of it is now empty land. The Israelis destroyed it. They destroyed huge tracts of homes. And other parts of it are now what they call the tunnels area. And we went in the tunnels, we went underground, and we saw that these tunnels are absolutely an essential lifeline for people in Gaza. I mean, I wrote about that experience in the book, and that what we saw coming in through the tunnels was really the most basic supplies that people need. And it really underscores how severe the Israeli siege still is. And the propaganda, when I was in the car, NPR had one of its rare reports on Gaza, and I was forcing myself to listen because I get so infuriated at NPR, I can't even listen to it anymore. But they had one of these typical interviews with an Israeli military spokesperson saying, we let 280 trucks into Gaza today, and snacks and makeup and soft drinks, and, to give the impression that everything is normal in Gaza. But the reality is that without the tunnels, the economy is really collapsing. Gravel, cement, rebar, fuel, the basic things. I mean, the UN has had to stop reconstruction of schools, I don't know how many times, because Israel won't let cement or windows in or pipes for plumbing. So it's, the siege is absolutely devastating, and it's only gotten worse in the past year after the military coup in Egypt. And so part of what I do is to try to put Gaza, because it is in many ways an exceptional situation, but to put it back into the context of the battle for justice in Palestine overall. Gaza, after all, is part and parcel of Palestine, or as people say in Arabic, an inseparable part of Palestine. And the people there are not, they often correct us and say, don't say we're Gazans, we're Palestinians in Gaza, in order to maintain that connection that has been severed. And this book covers a range of topics. Steve was very, very generous in describing it, and it does cover some of the big strategic questions, which I will have time to discuss and talk about. One of the amazing or wonderful parts of the experience of being on a tour now for almost 2 months has been going to places that have been such a fundamental part of the struggle for justice in Palestine in the United States. And Olympia is crucial. Steve mentioned that. And one of the fun things is to share those parts of the book with people there. So I don't know, maybe you already know the story, so it would be boring for you to hear it. But But I wanted to read the part about Olympia. Shall I do that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Because people like to hear about themselves too. Okay. But some of you know the story, and of course, because I'm covering many of these situations, I'm probably not doing it justice. But the reason I wanted to include what happened in Olympia in the book is precisely because it really was first and foremost because I think it was an incredible model of organizing and solidarity, but the response was really the first time. Remember that this is discussed in the context of Israel's organized campaign against boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And we didn't know the extent to which the Israeli government itself was involved. And the importance of what happened in Olympia is that it began to reveal. And now we know more. We know that they're much more involved than we even knew at the time. But that's the context for this. And again, I talk about how the pro-Israel and pro-Israel groups are getting involved, and we see this all the time now at the level of, any campus divestment battle. They're sending the Israeli consulate, they're getting members of Congress. I mean, members of Congress, usually we grow up thinking, Civics 101, you write a letter to your congressperson and say, I want this, that, and the other, or you should support this, that, and the other. What's happening now is at the behest of the Israel lobby, members of Congress are writing letters to students, sitting on student councils, and telling them, please don't vote for this divestment bill. That's actually happened in California, that members of Congress are lobbying students on behalf of Israel. I'm not kidding, it's in the book. So, no battle has seemingly been too insignificant or too local for Israel and its US-based surrogates to get directly and aggressively involved. Perhaps no case illustrates their zeal better than the assault on the Olympia Food Co-op. On July 15th, 2010, the Grocery Cooperatives Board adopted a boycott of Israeli goods, making it the first grocery store in the United States to remove Israeli products from its shelves in response to the Palestinian BDS call. The Palestinians welcomed the decision, which also had a strong symbolic resonance, as Olympia was the hometown of Rachel Corrie. The Olympia Food Co-op is a well-loved institution in the Washington state capital. That might be news to some of you. A leafy city of 50,000, but with just 2 stores, both smaller than a typical American supermarket. The boycott would not likely have any discernible economic impact on Israeli exports. Still, in the battle against what Israel calls delegitimization, Israel's backers were taking no chances lest the BDS cancer spread, and cancer is a word that they had used. In September 2011, 5 individuals identifying themselves as members of the Olympia Food Co-op filed a lawsuit in Thurston County Superior Court in Washington State and named every individual OFC board member as a defendant. Are there any defendants in the House tonight? Oh, all right, maybe not. Okay. Alleging that the boycott had only been imposed after, quote, members of an organization calling itself Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, an international alliance of anti-Israel political organizations, had made a presentation to the Food Co-op board, and the board had violated its established procedures. Although the Food Co-op had in place a long-established policy to honor nationally recognized boycotts, the lawsuit alleged that the boycott of Israel did not fit this definition. Unless the court declared the OFC's boycott of Israeli goods null and void, the lawsuit asserted, the plaintiffs would continue to sustain irreparable injury insofar as the Israel boycott, divestment, and divestment policies are fracturing the OFC community, sowing division and mistrust among OFC members, staff members, and board members, alienating numerous OFC members and staff members from OFC, and causing numerous OFC members to either resign their membership or otherwise cease shopping at OFC. That was the allegation in the lawsuit. In addition to overturning the boycott, the lawsuit demanded financial damages and court costs from each of the OFC board members. The lawsuit presented the plaintiffs as concerned local people, aggrieved about alleged violations of OFC's democratic procedures, and seeking only to restore the sense of harmony that the international BDS conspiracy had shattered in their close-knit community. But this was far from the truth. I had been tipped off that a lawsuit was being planned and began to investigate for the electronic intifada. I discovered that the lawsuit had been carefully stage managed with the assistance of the Pacific Northwest chapter of Stand With Us. Days before the lawsuit was filed, I spoke with Rob Jacobs, the Seattle-based director of Stand With Us Northwest. He told me he knew some Olympia residents were considering filing suit, but claimed his organization's role was largely limited to providing printed materials for handouts, helping bring in speakers, and offering general advice. Since we're not actually a party to anything down there, frankly, we're not in any of the loop regarding the legal matters, he claimed. Just from an attorney-client privilege standpoint, anything we would do with anybody would be violating some kind of privilege. So we know that they're doing some stuff. I know they've been working with an attorney. I know which firm it is, but beyond that, we have not in any way participated in the legal discussion. Jacobs also acknowledged keeping the San Francisco-based Israeli Consul General, Akiva Tor, informed about what's happening in the community here. But he denied that the Israeli diplomatic mission played any active role in opposing the OFC boycott. this too was misleading, to say the least. Jacobs was unaware when I spoke with him that we had already obtained copies of messages sent to a private email list of Stand With Us organizers. The emails, records, and agendas of meetings revealed that Jacobs and his deputy had met in Olympia in March 2011 with the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, along with Israeli Consul General Tor and Seattle attorney Avi Lippman. The meeting notes included, quote, presentation of legal case, close quote, and discussion of evergreen strategy. The latter was a reference to Stand With Us efforts to suppress Palestine solidarity activism at Rachel Corrie's alma mater, Evergreen State College, whose student body had voted in June 2010 to support divestment. The record showed that at the very least, Tor, an Israeli government official, had sat in on a meeting to formulate legal strategies to strike back at Americans freely advocating their opinions. Moreover, an agenda for an upcoming meeting of the Stand With Us Northwest Executive Committee listed several items under the heading of project status, including, quote, the lawsuit against the Olympia Food Co-op. A clear indication that, contrary to Jacobs' claims, Stand With Us was fully aware of the details of the legal case and was effectively managing the whole show. Months before they filed suit, the 5 plaintiffs had written a warning letter to OFC board members urging them to reverse course or face expensive legal action. Neither Jacobs nor attorney Lippman, to whom I also spoke in the course of my reporting, were able to tell me where 5 ordinary community members would obtain the considerable financial resources to pursue such expensive litigation against more than a dozen individuals. I had no doubt that the goal of the lawsuit was to punish the Olympia Food Co-op financially and to send a clear warning to other American businesses and organizations that they would pay a similar price if they answered the BDS call. The behind-the-scenes efforts of Stand With Us and the Israeli consulate were accompanied by an aggressive public campaign to smear the Olympia community. In a striking example, 4 of the 5 plaintiffs had appeared in a June 2011 video posted on YouTube titled, Why BDS Scars Don't Heal, a Stand With Us production. It portrayed sleepy and famously progressive Olympia. I hope you don't mind me calling it sleepy. I hope that's not. I mean, the event was supposed to start at 6:30, right? And so I think I'm okay. So it portrayed sleepy and famously progressive Olympia as something akin to 1930s Berlin. I really don't think it's comfortable for Jews to live in the city of Olympia and be outwardly expressing Jews, plaintiff Kent Davis claimed. You know, you can be a closet Jew, and that's fine. I just don't feel comfortable discussing my religion or my beliefs in a mixed group environment anymore. Tibor Breuer, identified in the video as an Olympia Food Co-op member but not a party to the lawsuit, claimed, It's amazing that I've been pushed aside as a Jew in this town because of the BDS. A woman from Port Townsend, Washington, where there had been an unsuccessful but equally contentious boycott effort at the local co-op, charged that BDS had generated, quote, a climate of fear and terror for Jews. At one point, an image of a Nazi swastika superimposed onto a Star of David appeared in the video with a caption above it stating, quote, actual image from handout. But there was no information on where or when the handout was supposedly distributed, or any evidence that it had anything at all to do with the Olympia Food Co-op or any BDS campaign anywhere. All the other grave claims of Jewish persecution in Olympia were similarly presented without a shred of evidence to back them up. Even the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, did not mention a single anti-Semitic incident in Olympia, or for that matter in Port Townsend, in its 2009, 2010, and 2011 annual audits, and generally found that Washington State had few reports of harassment of Jews. The video also repeated the claims that the OFC had been instigated by outsiders and by outsiders, even though it was always spearheaded and defended by local activists and co-op members. But the truth did not matter. The Stand With Us propaganda aimed to reflexively associate BDS, which one speaker called a dark organization, with anti-Semitism and even Nazism. BDS activities have no impact on the Arab-Israeli conflict, the video claimed. They only instigate anti-Semitism and leave communities divided and scarred for years. The Olympia community's fight back is a model for all who face such assaults. It included a video featuring Rachel Corrie's mother, Cindy Corrie, and other activists challenging the plaintiffs to use the existing democratic procedure to try to overturn the boycott. A solidarity petition declared that the lawsuit was an attack on the co-op's commitment to social justice, and by extension on all of us who raise our voices against injustice in the hope of creating a better world. The statement concluded, "We stand in solidarity with Olympia Food Co-op and say to those who have brought this lawsuit, we will not be intimidated or silenced." This community response was crowned by a major legal victory in February 2012 in a countersuit brought by the Center for Constitutional Rights and local lawyers on behalf of the OFC and its board members. As supporters of the boycott rallied outside the Olympia courthouse, Thurston County Superior Court Judge Thomas McPhee ruled that the Stand With Us backed legal action violated a state law against malicious lawsuits being used to prevent people from exercising their constitutional rights on matters of public concern. The legal victory set a precedent that boycotting is a form of constitutionally protected free speech, and according to observers in court, the judge refuted the claim that the BDS movement was not nationally recognized. The judge awarded $10,000 in damages to each of the 16 OFC board members to be paid by the plaintiffs. With this total defeat, Stand With Us had fallen into its own trap. So, well done, Olympia. And you know, even since I wrote that, more information has come out about the role of Stand With Us and the role of the Israeli government in these kinds of efforts all over the country. And I think what they're a sign of is the growing power of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And for those, I'm not going to assume everyone in the room knows what that is, but for those who are new to this, in 2005, 170 Palestinian civil society organizations from across the political spectrum in Palestine issued a call on people around the world. Basically, it says, look, you know, governments are not holding Israel accountable. The UN isn't doing anything. Decades have passed with Israel just flouting international law. So it's time for action. And remember, this also came in 2005. It was a year after the International Court of Justice had ruled Israel's separation wall in the West Bank to be illegal and said it must be torn down. And no action was taken. So, inspired by the campaign that had been waged in the 1980s in solidarity with people in South Africa, boycott, divestment, and sanctions on apartheid South Africa, Palestinians called for the same on Israel. And in 2005, I don't think anybody thought, maybe even supporters of BDS, that it would reach where it has today. In 2010, and this was, of course, just around the time of these events in Olympia, In February 2010, an Israeli think tank called the Reut Institute, with very close ties to the government and the intelligence services in Israel, had issued a report saying that, the main enemy, Israel's strategic outlook had always viewed Israel's main enemies in military terms, that Israel is going to be invaded and destroyed, and of course that's still a feature of Israeli propaganda. But the fact is there are no armies that have the capability anywhere within thousands of miles to invade Israel and defeat it militarily. And they know that. And so they said that the new threat is something called delegitimization. And that means you and me and everyone who's involved in this work, that Israel faces the prospect of being seen as an illegitimate regime, ruling Palestinians in an illegitimate way, the way South Africa's apartheid regime was viewed in its final years. And so the Reut Institute recommended a strategy, their words, of sabotage and attack, and actually recommended that Israel's intelligence services monitor what they call leftists around the world. Anyone who supports Palestinian rights is termed a leftist by the Israeli government. That's nothing to be ashamed about, but it kind of gives you a sense of their outlook. And it turned out that this was one of the earliest operations in this framework. And Stand With Us, which is very active in the Northwest, but it's around the country, is just one of a number of organizations that are engaged in this kind of activity. And one of the main venues, I think Steve is right, that in the 1980s, when I came to university in the US and when he was there, Palestine was much more of a taboo. But I think that students are much more willing to talk about Palestine than they were. But and there are teachers who are willing and professors, but universities themselves are not more welcoming. And what I document in the book is that actually university administrations have been almost without exception complicit in efforts to suppress Palestine solidarity activism on campus. And that almost a day doesn't go by without new revelations. Just a few weeks ago, Northeastern University in Boston became the first administration in the country to ban a Students for Justice in Palestine group outright. But because of and it was supposed to be banned until at least 2015, but because of the national organizing and national response to this, including the ACLU getting involved and threatening to sue the university was forced to back down and reinstate SJP. But just again, I learned so much from the Electronic Intifada. I have to say we're very proud of having so many amazing writers and contributors. So we had an article just a few days ago from one of the students there, and an interview with another of the students involved in SJP there, who was interviewed on the podcast this week, talking about how after the students distributed these mock eviction notices. This is a tactic many students have used. When I was in college, there was something called Gay Jeans Day. Who remembers Gay Jeans Day? It was a tactic used around the country where activists on campus would declare that next Tuesday is Gay Jeans Day. Wear jeans if you support LGBT rights on campus. And, people would whine and cry about this and say, this isn't fair, I'm being forced to take a position, and, I feel uncomfortable, and, and it was a very effective tactic for making people confront an issue that they didn't want to confront. And so these mock eviction notices, I think, are in a similar spirit, and what they've done is to place them under the on doors of dorm rooms or under the doors, saying, saying this is, you have 48 hours to clear out of your room, and then it says this is not real, but it's to raise awareness about Israel's systematic destruction of Palestinian homes, in which we as a country or a university that invests in companies that profit from the occupation are complicit, and it provides facts about this. And universities have been responding by saying, and some of these I believe have of course mentioned Rachel, because Rachel was trying to stop these very demolitions. I mean, she gave her life to try to save the home of a Palestinian family at a time when thousands of homes were being destroyed. And the response by pro-Israel groups has been to lie repeatedly and claim, they're lying. This has never happened, and university administrations have confirmed that it has never happened. They lie that Jewish students have been targeted. And that's absolutely untrue. These flyers have in every case been distributed randomly or to every room in a dorm, and no attempt has been made to target Jewish students. But the claim is designed to equate criticism of Israel with targeting Jewish people, criticizing Jewish people, in exactly the spirit of the Stand With Us video portraying Olympia as a place where Jews live in fear and terror.
I saw a news report to that effect.
About Olympia?
Not about Olympia, but about the dorm.
Yes.
That they were targeting Jewish.
Well, it's that.
I knew it wasn't true, but that's what's going out on the report.
That's right, and you've got newspapers like the New York tabloids that have disseminated these fabrications without questioning them. But so the reason that this is, that organizations like Stand With Us and the David Project have been focusing on campuses so much, and I have a significant chapter in the book called The War on Campus, is because they have decided, or they have determined, this is in the analysis of this group called the David Project, that the battle for the future of the US-Israeli relationship will be won or lost on campus. And they have said that if we lose the campuses, we will lose America. So this is an analysis, a strategic document that the David Project put out in 2012. And it helps us understand why tens of millions of dollars, literally unknown sums of money. I mean, we've seen millions. You can kind of document at least millions or tens of millions by looking at these foundations that are funding groups like Stand With Us and the David Project. But this is often coming from private family foundations, pro-Israel foundations, and the extent of it has not yet been fully exposed. But the reason they're doing it is because they say that the attitudes that shape society are formed on campus. Campus is something like 40-50%, I forget the exact number, of Americans will go to college. This is where the future elites, people who'll be in the media and government and corporations will form and shape their opinions, and so we have to nip this in the bud. And among the tactics that have been used is the use of, again, this is why the experience in Olympia is so telling, because it was one of the first places, if not the first, that a lawsuit was used. And now we see the routine, almost routine resort to the law to try to stop this. We've seen lawsuits filed against a number of universities, efforts to have individual professors prosecuted for doing such things as putting links to websites that support BDS on their personal websites. Of course, we saw the prosecution of the Irvine 11, the students who had done nothing but protest the Israeli ambassador with their voices, and the University of California, Irvine, colluded with Orange County prosecutors to have the students put on trial, and they were actually convicted under an obscure California law about disrupting public meetings. They were convicted of protesting the Israeli ambassador. And I make the argument in the Battle for Justice in Palestine, you can get into this detail, and it's absolutely incredible what's happening around the country. But I declare in the first sentence of the book the reason why I think this effort is going on, which is that the Palestinians are winning. And that may seem like a audacious claim given, for example, what I described about the situation in Gaza. But the case I make in the book is that they're winning the argument. And there is a potential for a shift in opinions in this country, particularly among younger people. Polls already show that gap widening. Support for Israel is very different. I mean, there's a huge generational divide on that. And people who are under 30, are not buying the propaganda that the baby boomer generation, by and large in this country, bought about Israel, particularly after the 1967 war. So I think what Israel and its lobby groups in the US fear is that within a few years you could have the kind of sea change that has happened in Europe. And you could have the kind of sea change that has happened in this country around issues such as same-sex marriage. Just 10 years ago, there were huge majorities against same-sex marriage in this country. And however you feel about it, and there are lots of critiques of same-sex marriage from a radical perspective. It's now not non-controversial. It's now so mainstream that not even the Republicans are going to try and make an issue of it. But the point is that it would have been very hard to predict that kind of change even 10 years ago. So I think that there's an effort being made to stem or forestall that kind of change on Palestine. I also talk in the book about the connections that campaigns around the country, particularly on campuses, are making with the struggle for social justice and racial equality in the United States. That whatever stories we tell ourselves about how the United States is a country of equal rights, a country of democracy, the reality for millions of people is very far from that. This is a country of mass incarceration that overwhelmingly imprisons people of color, particularly African American men, by the millions. And it's a country of mass deportation and increasing border militarization. So we see students making these connections around the country, and that's critical. And I think what's also so exciting is that students, perhaps as they've always been, are the conscience, are the ones who are prepared to say, who are demanding that we have the conversations that university presidents are refusing to have. Look at what's happened now. This is commencement season. Just in the past few weeks, when I was at Rutgers a few weeks ago in New Jersey, students were organizing against the fact that Condoleezza Rice was supposed to be their commencement speaker, and that she was going to be paid $35,000 for this to inflict herself on them. And this is a public university, and it's a university where, there are many working class people who struggle to pay the tuition, and it's outrageous that this very wealthy woman involved in war crimes should be given, this huge sum of money, and students are going to go away burdened with debt. Okay, maybe in the grand scheme of things it's not a big sum, but for an individual student they might spend years paying off such a sum. And they were so tenacious, and they occupied the president's office, and they got Condoleezza Rice out. And then just, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, the students at Smith College managed to disinvite Christine Lagarde, the IMF chief. And what's interesting about this, and maybe I'm straying now into topics that are a little bit farther away, that, as we head towards 2016, where we're going to be, I think we're going to have Hillary Clinton marketed to us as, breaking a glass ceiling. And what students are saying is that actually we're not interested. We don't consider it an achievement that women are simply being included in an unchanged power structure and war machine. We actually want the system to be transformed. And the battle for justice in Palestine is central to that struggle on many campuses, and that's also an important change from a generation ago. And maybe Steve would remember this, and many of us would remember that. Well, we have this phrase many of us have heard of: progressive accept Palestine. That the issue of Palestine was kept out of progressive politics. I have many friends who were involved in the struggle against U.S. support for right-wing dictatorships in Central America in the 1980s. And those were very radical communities, but in many cases, Palestine was not welcome. That's not universally true, but it was, many people had that experience where you could bring up anything, but not Palestine. And I think what's different now on the campuses is that Palestine is for many students and many young people the emblematic issue. It's not the only issue, but it is seen as, in a sense, the social justice or international justice issue of our time, in the way that the struggle against apartheid in South Africa was. So this is a book that I think is, I was very lucky with the timing. It comes at a moment when I think many people have recognized that the so-called peace process is really, really, really dead, and is not coming back. And even though they will try to revive it, I think John Kerry was meeting with Mahmoud Abbas or something the other day. You should not pay any attention to that. Don't even read articles about it. Just put it. It's total nonsense. And so many people are saying, well, what comes next? And what's our role? And so this book, I hope, will be a tool for people having those conversations. And why don't let's talk about it.
Hi folks, I'm Andrew. I'm an intern with the Rachel Corrie Foundation. I'm going to help coordinate the Q&A session. I'm going to probably take them one at a time, but I just please, no speeches, please. So with
the microphone.
Louder, Andrew.
Oh, here.
Thank you.
Can you repeat that last part again?
All right, so yeah, I'm going to help coordinate the Q&A. My name is Andrew, and please, no speeches. So with that, any hands, any questions? Doug?
I'm wondering if they can speak to the Hamas partnership.
All right. The recent so-called reconciliation agreement between Hamas in Gaza and Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah run Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. This is what I would say. I would say that Palestinians generally yearn for a united and broad-based Palestinian leadership that can represent them and fight for their rights, but this ain't it. And this is a tactical move by both, particularly by Abbas, in order to kind of put his finger in the eye of the United States and Israel after the latest failure of the so-called negotiations. It's not serious because the differences between them are very fundamental and unaddressed, which is that the Palestinian Authority, as run by Abbas, its main function is to serve the Israeli occupation. That's continued. The other day, Martin Indyk, the U.S. official in charge of the negotiations, career Israel lobbyist in charge of the negotiations, publicly praised Abbas for his forces' ongoing cooperation with the Israeli army and the Shin Bet secret police. And so Abbas is committed to collaboration with the occupation. That's the accurate description of it. And Hamas, even though it is respecting the ceasefire that it negotiated with Israel in November 2012, is still committed to military resistance. And so you cannot have unity between one side committed to collaboration and the other side committed to resistance. It simply will not function. And we've already seen officials from both parties making contradictory statements. Abbas saying, this means that Hamas accepts all my policies, and Hamas officials saying, the unity agreement forbids security collaboration. I doubt that Abbas had been told about that. And what's notably missing is any kind of program or strategy. Now, they haven't proclaimed, this is our strategy and this is the outcome we're looking for the Palestinian people. So I think increasingly, Palestinians are frustrated by the lack of leadership, but that's kind of a symptom of what's been inflicted on them. The forcible geographic separation of Palestinians. I tell the story in the book about how the U.S. backed a coup against, remember the U.S. demanded elections in 2006. Palestinians had elections. Hamas won. Hamas actually was engaged in an effort to, and I quote them in the book, they were sort of going on a political offensive saying, we want to talk, we want to take a political path. It was very much modeled on the path that Sinn Féin and the IRA had taken in Northern Ireland to say we want to move into a political process. And I think there was a tremendous opportunity there in 2006. And the U.S. could have done what it did in the case of Northern Ireland, which was to bring the IRA and Sinn Féin into a political process. But instead they slammed the door, imposed the siege on Gaza, and supported a covert plan with Fatah to overthrow Hamas. And that really is the root of the current division. And most people don't know about it because our official media in this country never talk about it. They always talk about this as if it's an internal matter and never reveal that this is just one more case of a U.S. subversion of another people's chosen leadership, as has sadly happened in so many cases around the world.
No, you in front.
What are some of the other notable areas in the country comparable with Olympia?
There's nowhere comparable with Olympia.
Thank you.
Foolish of me to give you any other answer. But what's amazing, look, I've since the book came out at the beginning of March, I've been up and down the East Coast and up and down the West Coast and in the Midwest. I still haven't been to the Southwest, which I want to do. That's very important to me because of the border issues that I discuss in the book, and the parallels between what's happening in Palestine and what's happening with the militarization of the U.S. border. But I can tell you, in the places I've been, there is this incredible energy, and I think a place that was really unforgettable was the University of Michigan, when students brought up a divestment resolution to the student government. And I'll cut to the end. The resolution lost. It went down in defeat. But that's really not the important part of the story. The important part was that they mobilized thousands of students. I might not have believed it if I didn't see it myself. But the first meeting where they discussed this, they had to move the student government from the tiny room it's usually held in, because no one shows up for student government meetings except the people who are on the student government, to the largest ballroom in the Michigan Union. And it's kind of like an airplane hangar. And University of Michigan people, they take University of Michigan very seriously. So Michigan Union is a huge building. And there were still hundreds in overflow rooms and thousands watching online. And then there was this rally outside, immediately outside, hundreds of people rallying. And the same thing happened a week later, because the first week, the student government decided to just postpone it indefinitely. They wanted to duck the issue. Then the students occupied the student government offices, and they said, we want this issue debated and discussed, and they relented. And the following week, I wasn't there, but again, we could see it all live on video. The following week, even more people came out. I can tell you this, those thousands of students were not all members of Students for Justice in Palestine. So something happened at the University of Michigan. And then the Michigan Daily came out and endorsed the effort and said this is one of the most important social justice issues of our time. We can no longer avoid it. We have to address it. And what struck me then, because I've seen this energy in so many places, is I have seen those kind of mobilizations before. But it's always been when things heat up. During Operation Cast Lead, when Israel was bombing Gaza for 3 weeks, or in November 2012, when Israel bombed Gaza for a week, or during the beginning of the 2000s, during the Second Intifada, people would come out, they would be passionate, but when there was a ceasefire, the energy would dissipate. People would stop coming out, and all but a small core would go home. And what's different now is that this energy is sustained, and it doesn't have to be in the context of massive bombardments. That's different, and that's happening, and Olympia is very much part of that, and in some sense was ahead of other places around the country. So everyone's now watching and waiting to see what Olympia is going to do next.
Yeah. So thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you.
And your work, your analysis, I think it's great. And I agree something's changed, but maybe a small addition to what you and Steve was saying. There was a pretty strong Palestine solidarity, even going back to the 70s. I remember, for example, in 1982, I was in D.C. with over 5,000 people against the invasion of Lebanon by Israel. We were there when we found out about the massacres in the camp. So I think it's important to see things change, but also it's something that did exist before. So I just wanted to add that. I guess my question, I'm really struck by the one country. I think it's just a great analysis. And I want to know, forces inside Palestine that kind of share that analysis and activism. I think it was really important what you were talking about our role here, how important it is in terms of building that base to delegitimize what Israel is doing. But I think what's going on inside Palestine is really important too. And I think I agree with your critiques you've spoken tonight about Hamas and Fatah, but I'm interested in forces that share your context and your trip recently. If you could maybe share what are some of the forces pushing for the kind of change you're talking about within Palestine or Palestinians within that Green Line.
Thank you. And you're right. And everything we're doing now, we're standing on the shoulders of people who've come before. And also the repression is not new either. It's been since the 70s and 80s. Today we talk about the Irvine 11. Well, there was the LA 8. And so the repression, the government-sponsored repression of Palestine solidarity activism is not new. But sadly, you know, this has come up time and again. I think a good history, a people's history of Palestine solidarity in the U.S. needs to be written, because otherwise we risk losing that. So if there are any students or historians here who are looking for projects to do, I think that will be a very important one. As a central part of this book is talking about, well, what does the future look like? And of course, one place to start is a diagnosis of what the present looks like, and or what is. And if I can mention my first book, One Country, which came out in 2006, that was. I'm impressed that Steve got the whole title. One Country, A Bold Proposal. I have never been a big fan of the subtitle. The publisher came up with that. You know, it just seems, you have to be bold, so okay. But a bold proposal to end the Israeli-Palestinian impasse. At the time, you know, it was not the only book, but one of very few sort of serious efforts to kind of put the issue of a single state back on the table. It wasn't new, I didn't invent it. It has a long history, this idea, but it was an effort to renew it and to put it out there. And it's just amazing how much has changed in the 6 or 7 years. It's now almost non-controversial. But I think the biggest point is people have understood that actually it's not, as John Kerry said, going to be apartheid. It's already apartheid. There is already a single state, a single geopolitical entity in historic Palestine, ruled by Israel, where Palestinians suffer different grades of exclusion and oppression and marginalization and physical control, from perhaps the most severe in Gaza to you know, Palestinian citizens of Israel who have some rights, but who are still facing large-scale expulsion, like the Bedouins in the Naqab in the south. Tens of thousands are facing expulsion. Palestinian citizens of Israel face, you know, systematically dozens of discriminatory laws and so on. So it is already apartheid, and the question is, so how do you transform it? And in the book, I try to take on the skeptics and the critics, the critiques that came out since One Country, in the chapter called Israeli Jews and the One-State Solution, which examines, it focuses on the attitudes of Israeli Jews, because you always hear this claim that, well, Israeli Jews would never accept democracy and equality. Well, of course they wouldn't if given a choice, because people, you know, in power almost never do. The question is not, will, you know, if we just ask them nicely, will they one day accept it? No. The question is, under what conditions will their attitudes and opinions and calculations change? And I think that I make the case that BDS is fundamental to that. It's already forcing Israelis to re-examine, but it's also making Palestinians re-examine the options and the attitudes. And I think a lot of Palestinian support or acquiescence to the so-called two-state solution, which I actually call in the book the two-state problem, came out of a sense that nothing else is, this is the maximum we can ever hope for. And I think the exciting thing about this moment is that Palestinians see that actually the horizons can be much broader. that we can go for justice, we can go for decolonization, we can go for all Palestinian rights, and we're no longer willing to be told that, oh, that's not pragmatic, or that's not moderate. That what's not pragmatic and not moderate is to tell people, you must give up your rights for the sake of something we're misnaming as peace. So really, I'm kind of, in a sense, going round your question to get back to it, that we're at such a fluid moment that all the assumptions people have had for the past 20 or 30 years are up for grabs. And I think we can afford to really, I make the case in the book, we can look at what happened in Northern Ireland and we can see how people are rewriting history in order to fit with a messy present of power sharing, inequality, and so on. They're abandoning cherished myths in order to adapt to the future, and that actually Israeli Jews could embrace this kind of transformation pretty quickly under the right circumstances. At least that's what I'm arguing.
What about the one-state solution and the right of return? How do those fit together?
Very nicely. Because of course, the claim that Palestinians can't return because it's not pragmatic or not practical has always been false. It's always been utterly untrue. The only reason that Palestinians are not permitted to return is because they're not Jewish. And so the reason you have 1.7 million Palestinians concentrated in Gaza, remember 1.1 million Palestinians in Gaza, so about 80%, are refugees or direct descendants of refugees, and therefore also refugees. And they come from lands, often just a few miles from Gaza, that are uninhabited today. That are empty. Israel has kept most of the land, 90% of the land, according to Salman Abu Sitteh, from which Palestinians were expelled, is today uninhabited. So it's not a practical question. There is space for Palestinians to return to. It actually makes sense, given the stress on the environment, not to concentrate 1.7 million people in Gaza, but to allow them to use all of the land in a sensible and sustainable way, as well as that being just. So when you take away the racist rationale that you can't come back to your country just because you're not from a particular ethnic group, then all kinds of possibilities open up. And so the right of return is very fundamental. And what Palestinians are already doing, and some Israelis, in fact, and I mentioned this in the book, Badil, a Palestinian refugee rights organization, and Zohrat, an Israeli organization that educates Israelis about the Nakba and advocates for the right of return, have actually done joint or doing joint work, kind of, involving. I mean, ultimately, it's got to be refugees themselves who are thinking and imagining and planning for what return looks like. And they've also gone to South Africa and talked to people there about that.
You? Yes.
Okay, I had a question regarding U.S. foreign policy and the way that it's impacted the portrayal of Israel and Palestine and the peace process altogether. I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a broad question. I suppose the main thing that comes to mind, there's many things I could say, but the first thing that came to mind was that the paradigm of the so-called peace process and the way it's been talked about and framed, falsely, fraudulently, I think is a better word, portrays Palestinians and Israelis as sort of two sides, when the reality is that's the wrong metaphor. It's not sides, it's on top and crushed below. And so there's been this false narrative of, two sides who have differences and then going to negotiate, and that has erased the reality of this huge power imbalance. And I think U.S. foreign policy and the so-called peace process have, under the cover of this false parity and false equality, Israel has been able to aggressively escalate its colonization of Palestinian land and all its other actions with total impunity. And I think the BDS movement, and which is created and led by Palestinians, offers an alternative which is true, which is to replace this fraudulent understanding of parity and peace and dialogue between equals with a paradigm that recognizes the power imbalance and the injustice, and that Palestinians are occupied, colonized, and living under apartheid inflicted by Israel. And that clarity and honesty then provides a path for action. So that's I think, also a sign that what the US government and the media, who take all their cues on foreign policy, no longer have the power to determine the narrative.
Cool. Do you have like a few more last one?
I'm happy to go on. I think we need to finish.
We have until 9. We have about 10 minutes.
So I think if we take a couple more questions and then we have time for signing books. I have to tell you, I want these books out there, and I definitely, they're very light if you pick one up. But if you carry 25 in your suitcase, they're incredibly heavy. So really hoping not to take them on to Seattle or back to Chicago, and I want to leave them all in Olympia. So why don't we go on for a few more minutes, and then we'll have time for book signing and chatting and so on.
Dude with a hat.
I just wanted to talk as a person who had been involved with the divestiture and boycott, mainly regarding Burma, and that was this insurmountable situation that existed, for over 40, 50 years now, and finally got solved through compromise and generals that were getting older and a bunch of factors different than Israel. But I noticed that we had the most support from African countries, actually, from Nigeria and from South Africa, for the boycott. When you mentioned the non-cooperation of Latin America, it doesn't surprise me, but maybe African states have a different attitude about the Palestinian situation than at least the southern. My point is just, where is boycotts going now? I mean, what is the objective? Because people look at insurmountable situations, sometimes they give up hope, and even Burma got solved, or is slowly getting solved. Where is the boycott going to lead to as far as what can be accomplished?
Well, I argue in the book that BDS changes the discourse, it changes the balance of power, it changes the calculations of the powerful. It makes them understand that the path they're on is unsustainable and that they have to consider an alternative. Of course, BDS alone doesn't do that. BDS is a solidarity movement, again, initiated and led by Palestinians, but involving people all over the world, and it complements other forms of struggle, all the forms of legitimate resistance that Palestinians engage in Palestine and wherever they are. But it's about changing the calculus. You can't have, even if you want to have negotiations, we all know that you can't have negotiations between someone who is this powerful and someone who has no power. That's not a negotiation, it's coercion. And a contract at gunpoint is legally invalid. And Palestinians are always being asked to sign contracts giving up their rights at gunpoint. And so it's really critical that balance be changed. That gives a chance for transformation. And so I think the situation is far from intractable. I actually think that the possibility of radical transformation within the next few years is very real. But there are dangers too, and this book also serves as a warning that we can see from South Africa that changing the politics without addressing the economic injustice and lack of economic democracy can lead into another dead end. And South Africa is having to deal with that now, even though people still rightly celebrate the tremendous achievement of ending apartheid. The lack of economic equality and democracy threatens that achievement. And the same process is going on in Palestine already. We don't need to wait until after political liberation to be disappointed and disillusioned by the economic betrayal, because that's already happening. And I write about that in the chapter called Neoliberal Palestine. So I'm optimistic about the possibility for transformation, but I think that, and this is far from intractable, but I think this is a moment where we have to be really aware of the experiences that of those who've gone before and learn from them. And one thing I suggest is put economic democracy and justice really at the center. And that's something that's not unique to Palestine. I mean, neither South Africa nor Palestine exist in an economic vacuum. They exist within a global neoliberal system that is driving inequality everywhere, that is enriching ever fewer people while more and more people are struggling to get by. Palestine is part of that. And so there are things that I'm very optimistic about, but there are also alarm bells that I'm trying to ring.
Bearded dude in the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. I work at the Olympia Food Co-op, and I'm a defendant in the lawsuit.
Oh.
He asked about that before you got here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I was also a member of the sleepy community that goes late. So if you answered this question already, and I'm going to buy a book, or if it's in the book, just let me know so we can go off it. But I'm aware of the connection with Stand With Us. Can you tie support of the lawsuit directly to any money or power source in Israel?
I can't do that, but I will say this is I think that and there has been some reporting on this about money coming from Israel and a bigger role Stand With Us, and because I'm at the end of a lot of travels, not all the synapses where that information is stored is firing, but maybe someone else in the room knows it. But notwithstanding the fact that there may be money coming from Israel, and we have seen Israeli government funding to groups like Stand With Us, I don't think, this is my hunch, I don't think most of the money comes from Israel. I think that most of the money comes from the United States. And I think it comes from large private foundations that basically people who are fanatically pro-Israel, and they want to put it into groups like Stand With Us and the David Project and the Hasbara Fellowships and the Israel, and so on and so forth. And we've documented some of that funding to various groups. So I don't think that Israel even needs to pay for this, because there are people willing to pay for it. But we have documented other kinds of direct Israeli government funding of propaganda efforts. For example, the National Union of Israeli Students, which functions willingly as a propaganda arm for the Israeli government, and they get funding from the Israeli government, and they've launched initiatives to pay Israeli students to troll Facebook and post pro-Israel comments and that kind of thing. And there are other things where we see these propaganda things. For example, there was the famous Mark III Pax hoax, also known as the Gay Flotilla video hoax, where this video appeared, this was in June 2000, it was a couple of years ago, when this video appeared. It was just during the time when flotillas were going to Gaza, and it purported to be an American activist. He claimed, although he had this Israeli accent, but I mean, you know, he claimed to be sort of born and raised in the U.S., but it looked, kind of shady, and that he had approached the flotilla organizers, and he'd said, I want to support Gaza, and he claimed he was told that no, you can't. We're not interested in your kind because you're gay, and the video was entirely fraudulent. The guy was an Israeli actor or kind of nightclub celebrity called Omer Gershon. And what was interesting about it is that it had its first appearances on social media. It had been tweeted by by a guy who worked in the Israeli Prime Minister's office, a kind of a very junior guy from New Jersey, who set up a Twitter account apparently just to tweet this video. And it had also been tweeted by this guy who had worked, consulted for the Israeli government on public relations and Hasbara, or propaganda efforts. The point of this is that you can see the traces of an Israeli government role, but nobody could actually find ultimately who made and paid for this video. That's in the end, you can find fingerprints, but still nobody knows who. It was probably some PR consultancy that was working as part of a broader Israeli government strategy, but you couldn't find the people who actually did it. And so much of this is like that. So we may never, know exactly where all the funds come from.
Zad?
Get one question.
I was just curious about the context of that cover. If you could speak about that, just out of curiosity.
Thank you. I was hoping someone would ask me that question. My mother is convinced this is me. I mean, she keeps saying, it looks like you, I don't believe it's not you. And, but this photo was taken in November 2012 in Gaza. The photographer is named Mejdi Fathi, and it was taken when Palestinians were celebrating the ceasefire that they had forced Israel to agree to in November 2012. And so to me, this photo really touched me. I do not know the name of the young man in the image, and I'm amazed that he still hasn't been identified given social media and given that this image is all over Facebook. I keep waiting for him to come forward, and I actually have friends in Gaza who have tried to identify him, but I don't know if he's seen the cover yet. He'll be pretty amazed, and my mother will be disappointed if he's identified. I think she's just kidding with me. But that's the context for it, and I just think it's such a powerful and also a hopeful image as well.